The boy crouched to peer under the huge feed bin. In a scooped-out hole he could see a bitch being nuzzled by newborn pups. The little mites were wriggling, crawling blindly on top of each other. Gentle-handed, the boy reached under the bin. When the bitch's tongue licked wetly on his fingers, he rubbed his ears. "I'm all right, Roga," he whispered. "It's only me. I'm just feeling 'em to count 'em." As he said it, he slid his fingers along her sleek body. Lightly he touched each squirming pup. Their eagerness choked him in the throat. He wanted to stay there, just him, the bitch, and the pups, but he couldn't. He could sense the tall old man staring down. Slowly the boy straightened. Worry lines creased his freckles. "There's 7 of 'em, Kanga," he said. 7 little buttes. And they're all snuggled up. He hoped to sound confident, but his voice broke. Kanga's lean height stooped. His hard, wide shoulders brushed down past the boy. Stiffly the old man groped to pull out the 7 pups. One after the other, he set them on the strawed floor. When the 7 squirmed in a line, he rolled each one with a finger. The finger was calloused, yet its touch on the pups was light. The mites wriggled, then scratched fatly at their bellies. The boy watched every movement. His heart seemed swollen inside his shirt. Corey thought, "I wish I could grab 'em all and run, run, run. But there ain't nowhere to go. Just sand and waste and desert. You couldn't get far before old Kanga'd have you." He waited while the pups wheezed faintly. Finally Kanga towered to his height. The boy saw a pup in the old man's hand. This'll do," Kanga said. "He's got the most bone. You'd best get rid of the others." He slid the pup onto the boy's cupped palms. Dejectedly the boy held it close to his chest. "Come on, little feller," he said with a sigh. "I'll put you back with your mum." He knelt to slip the pup under the bitch. She whimpered, calling to the rest of her litter. The boy swiveled around. The 6 remaining pups squirmed at his feet. He tucked them together, pushing each little ball against the other. "Couldn't she keep 'em, Kanga?" he whispered. "Couldn't she keep 'em all, just for a while?" Kanga rubbed tobacco in his hand. The battered felt hat masked his gaunt, seamed face. He had the tobacco tamped in his pipe when he said, "There's enough strife about for a good dog, son. Never mind for them that ain't wanted. And if you want a king dog, you have to rear 'em right on his own, so he'll grow big and strong." The boy stroked the pups. They wriggled when he bunched them. Their tiny heads reached in search of their mother's teats. He wished they were his to give back to the bitch. Kanga struck a match. Through encircling hands he puffed and drew on the pipe. The bowl glowed as he added, "You'd better get a shovel and bucket. I'll have 'em set when you get back." The boy choked. He tried to speak, but words blurred in his throat. With a final pat he rebunched the pups and walked toward the door. Kanga watched the boy go. When he returned, the shed had darkened. Kanga knelt with his back to the feed bin. In front of him lay now still pups. Blindly the boy gave the bucket to Kanga and kept the spade. Kanga took the bucket with one hand and lifted the pups with the other. They settled limply, piled in a soft-skinned heap. Rising, he gave the bucket to the boy. "Here you are," he said. "They're better off out of it. Take 'em out to the sand hills and dig a hole. They'll be right when you tip 'em into it." For a long, long moment the boy stared up at Kanga, then down at the bucket. Slowly he turned and went out through the doorway again. Kanga heard him stumble on the rough timber step. Outside, the sun had set under the peppercorn trees surrounding the homestead. It was already dark. The boy saw a light glitter brightly in the kitchen. Up in the trees, galah cockatoos scrambled for their roosts. They're all alive, he thought, warm and waiting for tomorrow. Yet the pups, they're all dead, all except one. You can't understand a man like Kanga. He's like an old tree that doesn't think or feel. Clear of the peppercorns, the boy trudged westward, when the red earth plains merged into drifting sand. He set down the bucket, then leaned on the spade. The handle felt cool and smooth to his grasp. Overhead, an odd star or two began to show through the haze. Slowly the boy dug a hole. He finished it with his hands, making the sides clean and straight. Then he lined the hole with dry, withered tussock grass. "You'll be right there," he said, and gently placed the pups side by side in a hole. "And when I cover you, I won't press hard. That way," he wiped a hand under his eyes, "you won't feel bad. You'll know that the light ain't too far away." He covered the pups by letting sand trickle down. When he leveled the top, the hole was lost in a vast sea of desert. Trudging back, he thought of many things: the mystery of death when it comes, the quick way life has of going. One minute the pups were warm and wriggling, the next they were limp and still. And where had it gone? Life, as it's called, the boy didn't know, but he did know the pups were dead. They were nice little fellers, every one a beaut. He set down the bucket to rub a hand under his eyes. At the bunkhouse he left the spade and bucket outside. In his room the air felt hot and heavy. Through the window came the whisper of leaves rustling on the peppercorns. Sprawled flat on his bunk, the boy let tears flow freely. He didn't mind when nobody was there to see. But on the other side of a timber partition, old Kanga heard. He puffed his pipe, then shook the ash. The bowl glowed redly in his hand. Hard-knuckled, he rapped the partition. "You there, boy?" he said. "You ain't ate yet. Your tucker's in the kitchen. Miss Jones was asking for you." The boy wiped his face. His boots clumped when he sat up. "Yeah," old Kanga went on, "there's pie and cream. I saw it on your table." He lay back and closed his teeth on the pipe. The boy wavered. "I'd just as soon stay," he thought, "but if I do, she'll be over for me. Then I'll have to go, or she'll think I'm crook and send for the boss." His feet shuffled as he edged toward the door. It was dark in the room, and he couldn't see too well. "Thanks, Kanga," he said. "I nearly forgot. The trouble was that job I had to do." He went out through the doorway and clumped down the steps. On his bunk, old Kanga puffed. Smoke drifted up in the darkness. In the kitchen, Miss Jones rolled dough to fit the bread tins. She smiled when the boy came in. "Set down," she told him. "Your tea's cold. I'll make a fresh pot." She wiped her hands on her apron. The boy pulled out a chair. He had a knife and fork in his hands when he said, It don't matter, Miss Jones. A feller in drink it cold, the same as if it's hot. I'm sorry I'm late in for tea." He paused and looked up. Miss Jones saw the smudge where he'd rubbed his eyes. She had heard from Kanga about the pups. She wished there was more she could do. "Never mind," she said. "You couldn't help it. Now pass me the pot. I can't have you drink cold tea." Later the boy stood up. The pie crust and cream tasted sweet in his mouth. He scraped the last crumb from the plate. "Do you want me," he asked, "to give you a hand? Help with the washing up?" He reached for the door as he spoke. One leg held it partly open. Miss Jones smiled. She liked the way he had, always willing to help, yet always half away somewhere else. "No," she told him, "there's not much to do. You go along and don't get worrying. Good night, and make sure you wash. There's still dust on your face." The boy nodded. It ain't dust, he thought. It's sand, from the sand hills. I had it on me hands. Good night, Miss Jones, he said. I'll be around early to get wood to cook breakfast. He let the door rub, sliding across his back as he went out. In the morning, Kanga rode away before dawn. Behind him trotted his rabbit-hunting pack of 34 dogs. At his side, loose muscles and scarred, lopped Skipper, his king dog. Kanga couldn't see him, but knew he was there. He always had been since his training as a pup. He always would be until he died, unless Kanga chained him to a peg or whistled him to control the dogs. Then Skipper would hurtle to rip and slash to bring the pack to order. The dog was Kanga's life. If he knew love, it was for the dog. If the dog knew love, it was for Kanga. The two were inseparable, except by chain or command. An hour after Kanga had gone, Yambora homestead stirred. Stockmen came from the buildings to yard their saddle horses. Wild galahs squawking in the peppercorn trees woke the boy. As a rule, he liked to hear them. They flocked in great numbers to Yambora, and the big old trees were a favorite roosting place. But this morning their angry chattering seemed more raucous. "Get out," he shouted as he pulled on his boots, "and start the day right. You've all got rotten tempers." Then he thought about Brolga and the pup. Under a tap he splashed his face with water, then went out through the gateway. Near the stables he waited while horses galloped by. An aboriginal stockman riding behind them waved and smiled. His white teeth flashed over the bobbing rumps. The boy saw the whip in his hand swing up and down. As it cracked, the big mob of horses surged. Squint-eyed in the dust, the boy entered the shed. Its door hung open, propped by a stone. On the floor he settled on hands and knees. Brolga was still there, under the bin. The pup was asleep, curled in a ball. A tiny snuffle sniffled through its jaws. The bitch nuzzled the boy's hands for scent of her pups. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but I couldn't do a thing. You know how it is with Kanga. He's hard, Brolga. Hard as a mulga log." Unknowing the words, but keen to the boy's tone, Brolga licked his hand. She pushed her muzzle deep into the cupped palm. The scent of her pups stayed strong on the boy's skin. He let her push. His fingers touched her warm jaws. "So there it is," he thought. "She loved her pups, but I buried 'em. Lay 'em deep in that round sandy hole. And all because Kanga wants to breed a king dog, a dog that'll fight and kill if the old man wants him to." The boy stroked the bitch, then scrambled up. "I'll get you a feed," he said, "and something to drink. It's me best, Brolga. I tried to save 'em, but I didn't have a chance." At the door he bumped into a man. Ross, the overseer, stood crag-like on the step. "Good day, son," he said with a nod. "You're about bright and fresh. How's the bitch and her brood?" He held a bridle hooked on his arm. A stock whip coiled on his shoulder. The boy sighed. "She's right," he said, "but there's only one pup. Kanga killed the rest, and I hadn't to bury 'em." He said it the way he felt, as if he'd helped to kill them. Ross nodded. He rolled a cigarette and stared over the boy's shoulder at the horse yards. A stockman was saddling a young horse. The horse bucked and threw the saddle from its back. Ross held the cigarette. "Get hold of his ear," he shouted, then looked down at the boy. "Yeah," he said in a softer voice, "that's how it is with Kanga. He's got to rear a pup to take the place of Skipper. He's getting old and mightn't last much longer. Believe me, old Kanga knows his dogs. Now get on over to see the cook. She might want some wood or something." His face creased as the boy left. A smile blurred the set, weathered lines. "And keep that chin up," he added. "Then you won't knock into a man. You ain't safe with your head down." He heel-rocked toward the stables, chuckling. He stood 6 foot and weighed 15 stone. At the wood heap the boy split a log into short, neat lengths, then trundled them to the kitchen. As he set down the barrow, he sniffed the warm, still air. The smell of bread, fresh baked from the oven, drifted out through the door. When he opened it, the smell grew richer. Frying chops added to the odor. Arm loaded, he carried in the wood. Miss Jones bustled near the fire. Pans of bread glowed brownly on their racks. The wood rattled as the boy dumped it down. He noticed the box was empty. Miss Jones must have used the last stick to bake her bread. "I'm late," he said, "and I promised you. But I hadn't to look at Broga. She's doing fine with her pup." He stared at the chops sizzling in the pan. Miss Jones fussed with a turning fork. "Don't worry." She told him, "I had enough. There's a mug of tea there, waiting on the table." Fat hissed when she turned a chop. The boy nodded. Near the mug stood another pan of chops, salted but uncooked. Reaching for the mug, he inched a chop into his hand along with the mug. Carefully he carried both outside. Miss Jones glanced over. When the door closed, the smile grew broader across her face. "That's one less," she thought, "but God bless his soul, he'll put it to good use. It'll help make milk for Broga's puppy." She turned the rest of the chops, then lifted the other pan from the table. Outside, the boy gulped his tea, washed down hot and tasty. Miss Jones always sugared it just right. With the chop rammed into his pocket, he headed for the stables. A group of stockmen coming in for their breakfast said the usual, "Good day, son," but the boy just nodded. The chop felt greasy and cold in his pocket. He could feel it sticky against his leg. They might see the bulge, she thought. These trousers are pretty tight. The men walked on, bow-legged, on their heels. One of them rubbed his chin. He looked kind of scary-like. He said, "And not too good in the gate. Seemed to have a limp." He spat as he went through the gateway. In the shed, the boy hunkered down against the wall. He eased the chop until the bone end showed. The raw red tip poked out invitingly. "Come on, bro," he said. "Come and see what's here." He pulled the chop to show another inch. Excitement made him jerky. The chop almost fell, and he had to push it back. Broga crawled slowly, mindful of her pup. Her head showed first, then her sleek, slender body. Tail held low. She feathered straw on the floor. Close to the boy she crouched, nuzzling his hand. The scent of meat overpowered all other, even that of her pups, and hunger made her drool. The boy chuckled. He twisted over till his pocket was fully showing. The chop protruded on his lean, boyish rump. "You ain't lookin'," he told her. "You're in the wrong place. Just sniff along till you find it." Broga sniffed, then she lifted her head to sniff again. Inquiringly she snuffled along his trousers, into every crease and wrinkle. Near the pocket she questioned the boy. Her soft eyes begged for permission. The boy nodded. His hand slid over her ears. "Sure," he whispered. "I brought it for you. You and your little bloke asleep under there." He nodded again, this time toward the bin. Sight of the bin reminded him he had 2 horses to feed, as well as Broga. Patches and Powder were gray Arabs kept especially for the boss. He could hear them stamping in their stalls. Scuffle-footed, he scrambled up from the wall. "You see how it is," he said to Broga. "I look after you and forget them. They'll kick down their stalls if I don't feed them." The bitch wagged her tail, jaws clamped on the chop. She crept under the bin. The boy heard her crunch as he threw up the lid. With stomach flattened, he hung over, groping for 2 buckets. He buried them in chaff, then pulled them out. The short golden stems overflowed when he lifted. Carefully he plodded toward the door. The bucket swung as he turned before going out. "I'll be back," he called. "Jess, you stay here. Next time I'll bring some water." The crunch of bone was Brolga's answer. In the stalls he worked fast. Patches nipped him on the trousers, right where the chop had been. Powder tried to bump him. The boy dodged neatly. "I'm awake to you," he told him, "and don't think I ain't. If you'll give me time, I'll tip it in." While they ate, he cleaned their stalls. The floors were raked and the straw bedding stacked when he slapped each snowy rump. "So long," he said. "You're right for another day. The boss'll feed you lunchtime." He ducked and scurried away when each took a flying kick. After breakfast, Miss Jones wanted eggs. "It's cake day today," she said, while the boy wiped his plate. "And I'll need some eggs. A billyful will do." The boy was halfway through the doorway when she added, "You could look along the hedge, but be careful of the nests. I want fresh eggs, not stale." The boy let the door close. He flipped up the billy can, then caught it as he walked along the path. "She talks a lot," he thought, "but means her best. A feller knows not to touch the broodies. You can tell 'em by their feathers and the shine they put on their eggs." Under the hedge he scrapped and crawled. The rough limbs clawed his back. He kept one eye searching for eggs, the other for slithering snakes. Go on as he didn't mind, they hissed and spat, but you could hunt them away. Snakes reared up to strike. You had to be quick to get away in time. The billy was full when he saw a snake in the dust, a long, thin tongue flickering, questing from its jaws. Startled, the boy pushed backwards, then gaping head seemed almost under his chin. He heard it hiss as he crawled on backwards. "Phew," he gasped. Clear of the hedge. He scrambled upright. "You made me puff. Another yard and I'd have touched you." The thought made him shiver. He was glad of the sun flaring down on his shoulders, glad too that he'd balanced the billy. Not an egg was cracked or broken. In the kitchen, Miss Jones lifted out the eggs, then set them in a bowl. "They're lovely," she said, "lovely and fresh. Did you have any trouble finding them?" The boy shook his head. A leaf or 2 still clung to his hair. "No," he told her, "they were just lying about. I didn't go near the broodies. There's a few of 'em, too, on their nests." Miss Jones nodded. Broody hens meant more chickens. More chickens meant more fowls for the table. "That's good," she said with a smile. "We must look out for them. There's a pen in the garden to put them in." She rinsed the billy under a tap. The boy watched her hands. They were large and white, with smooth, round fingers. He'd seen them often lift great steaming pots. She's strong, he thought, though her arms looked soft. You can't see any muscle. The billy was back in his grasp when he said, "Yeah, I like the little uns. They're all fluff and wool." He remembered the snake, beady-eyed and waiting, but they get a rough trot if a snake gets at 'em. Miss Jones came from Sydney, far away on the New South Wales coast. She had read about snakes, but seldom seen one, only in Taronga Zoo. The thought of them made her cold. "Yes," she agreed, "I believe they are bad. We'll have to be careful." She looked directly at the boy. "And you be careful, too." The boy chuckled. "I will," he said, and left her wondering if he really would. Later she talked about it to Ross, the overseer. He was sitting straddle-legged in the men's dining room, the back of the chair poked up through his arms. His chin hung over the top. He liked to sit that way after a day in the saddle. It rested his legs, he said. He rocked up straight when she entered. The chair legs squeaked on the hard, bare floor. Crag-faced, he listened while she talked. "Don't worry, ma'am," he told her. "He'll live to grow, but I'll talk to him just the same, if it'll help to ease your mind." He added the last in the hope she would smile. It lighted her face when she did. "Thank you," she said. "I thought you would," and left him holding the chair.